Our lives are the sum of our reviews, and we cannot escape the franchise. Let's talk about Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back at the Eye of the Storm podcast. So, today we're going to be doing something a bit new. As Mission Impossible Final Reckoning Part 2 will be coming soon, we thought, you know what, let's watch Part 1. So, Daniel.
Yes, so the idea is that Mission Impossible is kind of a weird one where it's a franchise that's been around since the 90s. And I think we've all seen one or two movies in that franchise. But I think none of us have either seen all of it or are that familiar with the details. And with Final Reckoning coming out soon, we thought we'd look at the first part of that, which I hadn't seen. I think the two of you have, right? And to try to get caught up on the story and what Mission Impossible has turned into. I definitely saw the first one, probably part two as well, and probably none since then. So to me, Mission Impossible has kind of been this kind of standard spy action franchise, and I think that's part of why for years I hadn't really paid attention to it, because they kind of kept coming out and they all looked kind of generic or just an action movie. And so I've not kept up with them. And so it was really interesting to see like what it had turned into at this point. So what's your guys' backgrounds with Mission Impossible, and how well do you know Dead Reckoning Part 1?
Yeah, so I've seen a couple of these. You know, when I was younger, I did watch maybe like Mission Impossible 2 or 3 or something. I think this one where he does a stunt where he's like tied to a pole and he lifts himself out of it, if you can say, or he does like this acrobatic thing and lifts himself out of it. But, you know, don't ask me to recall too much of that movie. But I've also seen, you know, some of the more recent ones, so like, you know, Ghost Protocol, Fallout, and of course Dead Reckoning when it first came out in the cinema. But these are all movies that I've kind of watched once and have enjoyed it for what it is, but haven't really revisited the movies or kind of done a bit of a deep dive or like delved into, you know, the core aspects of the movie. So it's ones that I do enjoy, but not ones that I would say I know super well.
I've watched it here and there in terms of like the whole franchise. I'm not too familiar with the whole storyline. I just see this as in terms of like Final Reckoning. No, this is Dead Reckoning Part 1, right? In terms of Dead Reckoning Part, what was it? Dead Reckoning or Final Reckoning?
So they made it difficult. It's Dead Reckoning Part 1 and then Final Reckoning. There's no Part 2.
Okay, I might have introduced. Hold on, yeah, I think I introduced. Actually, no, I didn't. Okay, it's Dead Reckoning. Cool. So in terms of Dead Reckoning, I didn't remember. I watched it in cinema, but I didn't remember it. I think the hype around Tom Cruise doing like the stunts is what drew me to watch the film. I think the film for me, I just saw it more as a action-packed experience. I wasn't really going there thinking I was going to be immersed by the story that was going to be told. I just thought, okay, let me see what type of stunts Tom Cruise is doing. That's got everyone all hyped up about. And I was impressed. I was definitely impressed about the stunts. The story was cool, but in terms of just like the action value behind it, that was more of the selling point for me. So overall, I think it was more of a theatrical performance, like rather than watching a film with a good story. So, but yeah, in terms of like the whole franchise as a whole, I'm pretty much unfamiliar like the rest of you guys.
For me, making the jump directly from probably part 1 or 2 directly to this one is kind of a culture shock. Like I had no idea what I was watching, because it's like in my mind, the Mission Impossible movies are kind of next to Top Gun, kind of the last classic Hollywood blockbuster franchise. Like pretty people going to exotic locations, having adventures, having big stunts, right? Like that's kind of like what we think of as classical Hollywood. And Mission Impossible seems to be one of the last few holdovers from that. And then what I actually got was, first of all, there are no human characters in this. Like none of the characters talk like human beings. They like kind of just sit in a room and explain the plot to each other, but they take turns explaining it. Like there's not even like a conversation between them. And I think this one is like going on 2.5 hours. Almost 3 hours long, 163 minutes. And that's probably an hour too long as well. And I saw somebody point out that the movie kind of has 5 scenes or something like that, or 5 big sequences, but this movie still manages to be 3 hours long. And then the actual great action sequences are like a few. Like in 3 hours, you get maybe 3 of them, something like that. That was kind of my big takeaway from the movie, where I was shocked. Like, this is the big golden age Hollywood blockbuster. Am I crazy? Am I alone in that?
For Dead Reckoning, it did feel like a step down from what Ghost Protocol was and what Fallout was, and the story that they had in that. I do agree though that the characters, I feel, always kind of talk that way, where they kind of just exposition dump everything about the plot and the story, and it kind of doesn't feel as authentic. But I feel like because I'm kind of used to the formula of Mission Impossible, I'm kind of used to getting those things. Is that I don't really mind it in this type of movie, and I don't feel like it's brings it down as much. And I know this is kind of like you said, boiled down to 5 set action sequences or scenes essentially. But for me, there was still kind of the thrill there in this movie in terms of just the stakes and the spy thriller aspect of it, of kind of like what's going on, of like, you know, people stealing stuff off people and, you know, having to place things back, and, you know, the weird and wonderful sort of gadgets that they're using, and sort of a lot of the like technologies that's being used, and sort of how things are being manipulated by the entity in this movie anyways, how things are being manipulated by the entity and stuff like that. So for me, it just kind of does those things well enough for me to just be like, okay, I'm having a good time. And I always say I'm not a big fan of just action movies for the sake of action movies, but there are, for me, a few that I do kind of enjoy because I feel like they do it a little bit better than, you know, your typical, you know, action movie that gets stumped out in January. I'm looking at you, the beekeeper. You know, things like John Wick, where the action's like incredible. I don't think, you know, the action in this is on the level of John Wick. I mean, there's some, you know, really good stunts here, but I mean, kind of like the shooting scenes and the actions and stuff like that. I think John Wick does it better, but there's just like this familiarity of it. And again, I don't know the franchise super well, but every time it comes on and every time I like see it, you just kind of get that reminder, you get that feeling of, oh, this is a Mission Impossible movie. Oh, it's going to have like these set things in there. You know, Tom Cruise is going to run a long distance in the movie. You're going to have like the whole face swap thing where, you know, they pretend to be someone else with a face and this and the other. You're going to have like things that go wrong. You have like your sidekicks and all that stuff. It just all felt familiar. And I feel like that's kind of what I enjoyed out of it.
For me, I feel like most spy movies are like that. They feel kind of corny, and I wouldn't say generic, but corny is definitely a big thing that I get whenever I watch these movies like Argyle. There was another film which Cody Baxter, that was actually one of my favorites back in the day. So very like it feels very, like I said, theatrical. It feels like you're watching a theater show. So going into Mission Impossible, that's what I was expecting. I didn't necessarily have the same experience that you had, is because I already knew what I was like walking into when it comes to spy movies. Unless you guys disagree that spy movies mostly are like that.
Well, I would disagree with that. Like, there's nothing about spy movies that requires that people kind of are stiff exposition machines. Like, generally, they still talk like people. Like, even the first, like the movie, the Mission Impossible movie I have the clearest memory of is the first one, and in that people talk like people. And then we do have like scenes where somebody explains something or introduces a technology or something, and we do have like the big elaborate like action sequences. Like I don't remember much about the plot of the first Mission Impossible movie, but I remember Tom Cruise suspended from the ceiling, having to hack into this air-gapped server, and then he drops his knife, and then the guy comes in and almost catches him, and then the sweat drop falls down. Like, that's kind of my image of like a Mission Impossible movie, and of like spy movies in general, where yes, it's heightened and people do impossible things, but they're still human. And I don't want to harp on about this too much, but like the entire tone was just so like they had left orbit years ago, it felt like. I'm kind of curious if you watch them all in sequence, if there's like a gradual progression, or if like at some point they change directors and it's just that person's style and it's been like this for 2 movies or something. I don't know, but it was just really jarring.
What I would say about this, and it's kind of similar to the Fast and Furious saga as well, is that, you know, as you progress these types of movies, is you can't kind of do the same things, and you kind of have to get bigger and you have to do more. And that doesn't excuse the dialogue, but again, with Mission Impossible, there's certain things that the audience come to expect of the movie, and it just feels like they try to dial that up to 100 or to exceed that every single time, as opposed to focusing on the narrative side of things and the story side of things. Again, like when I mentioned when we were discussing this before, is that when they were advertising this movie, the advertising that they were leading with was, this is Tom Cruise's latest crazy stunt that he did by himself. It's not, oh, this is going to be a very intricate mystery that needs to be solved. It's, this is what you're going to get from this movie. You're going to get, this, absolutely crazy stunt that Tom Cruise is doing. Same with some of the previous ones when he's hanging off of a plane and stuff like that. So again, it just seems like with these types of movies, It's how can we outdo what we did last time? How can we impress the audience more than we did last time? And it seems the story and the characters then kind of fall by the wayside a little bit, and the dialogue isn't the main focus of it. And you can kind of see it in something like John Wick, because John Wick isn't a man of many words in his movies, and most of the time he's just saying yeah to most stuff, because you're not really there for the dialogue. You're there because John Wick is about to murder 255,000 people in this movie, and he's going to do it in the most coolest and the most cool and the most amazing way.
I understand all of that, right? Like ultimately, like, the things I know about the other Mission Impossible movies is like Tom Cruise hanging onto a plane, for example, right? I picked up on that even though I had not seen the movie. And so that's kind of what it's famous for, and that's its big appeal, that they're doing these practical stunts, and that's kind of the centerpiece of these movies, right? But then they spend 2 hours just on exposition where they kind of explain kind of the stakes to each other. I'm not convinced that it actually has to be that long. It has to be that heightened and that wooden, and that you could just, have like 2 or 3 big action sequences and have them be connected by like human tissue, where characters kind of go from one to the other, and they do so for relatively understandable reasons. And it's not like any of this necessarily didn't make sense. It's more like the way it was delivered is really the issue, because this is not a complicated story. There's this killer AI that's about to co-opt all of civilization, and they need to contain it. And to contain it, they need this key that comes in 2 parts, and the AI is trying to stop them, and other factions are trying to get the keys as well. And there's like an arms dealer involved, and foreign governments and agents of the AI and stuff like that. Like, it's not terribly complicated. Like, if you just kind of summarize the plot, there's not that much going on. It's just, I think, entirely the way it's delivered that's so weird. And it kind of made me dread the next part, because that one's also like 2 hours and 40 or something like that. If it's another 3 hours, like almost 3 hours of more of that, then I'm a little like, it was kind of okay while I was kind of on my PC and I had it in a window open, and when they were talking about something not that complicated for 20 minutes, I could kind of drift off and do something else, and then 10 minutes later come back and they were still there. But if I imagine myself sitting in the theater for 3 hours, like almost 4 with the like with ads and trailers, I'm kind of dreading it, if I'm honest. And I don't think it has to be this way.
I understand what you're saying. I feel like if a film is going to be like, have a runtime that's nearly 3 hours, then you need a compelling story. And you're right, it isn't too hard to understand. And like I said, for me, the selling point was the theatrics and the action sequences. I understand how someone would get bored of just watching action for nearly 3 hours. So I do hear where you're coming from.
But there's like a middle ground. You can have like 100-minute movie, and every 30 minutes we have 25 to 30 minutes we have a big action set piece that lasts, I don't know, no, make it 2 hours, make it 120 minutes, whatever, right? Whatever the numbers are. Like, not that much happens. And it's like I really like the scene like with on the train when they try to get onto the train to get the encryption keys. But it's like they had something like at least 20 minutes of setup for that. And it's like, I'm not entirely sure that was necessary. Like, there are some very lean action movies that have several iconic action set pieces, right? Like Terminator is one of them. John Wick is one of them. Kingsman has like some amazing... I'm just in love with the fight scenes in Kingsman. Like the pub fight and the church fight and stuff like that. And like they have like 3 or 4 of those over the course of a normal amount of time. And it works. Like it's not rushed. It's not overcrowded. I feel like if this one kind of cut the exposition in half, it would be a much better movie.
Like, how come you guys don't have an issue with the fight scenes in like these spy movies, but then you had the issue with the fight scenes in Beekeeper? Because one of your main arguments were, the realism in what we were watching was ridiculous. But in spy movies, especially this one, I was watching certain things like, this is ridiculous.
I think you're confusing Beekeeper and Argyle. In Argyle, I had the complaint that they changed the rules several times. Like, they set up a standard for what's possible in this world and what kind of story this is, and then they change it several times, and they don't even stay consistent within the same scene, where they set up rules or kind of make promises on what kind of movie you're getting, and then they give you something completely different, but for no good reason. So it starts off fairly grounded, and then it gets increasingly crazy, but then it's not just an escalation, it's also that they kind of go back and forth, kind of at random, based on what they thought was cool. And and this movie is not like this, right? It's fairly consistent in terms of what's possible and what characters do, and kind of like the level of crazy. Like I'm totally on like, and I think I said back then in the Argyle conversation that I would have been fine with any of those 3 or 4 different spy movies. The problem with Argyle was that it gave us all of them at the same time and couldn't make up its mind about which one it was. And here it knows what it is, right? It's pretty consistent. People are too fast, too tough. The technology is too advanced and so on, like to be realistic, right? And so it gives us a fairly consistent, apparently in every Mission Impossible movie, there's a big reveal about the masks, right? Where somebody's pretending to be somebody else. And there's a big reveal. And that's one of those things you can expect in every installment. That doesn't make sense. I think it kind of was pushing it the first time they did it, and it's kind of gotten more ridiculous over time, and that's part of the appeal. That's the style you get from a Mission Impossible movie. It seems like within each movie, the style is pretty consistent. Like it does not change its mind about what kind of movie it is throughout the story. And I think that is something that I can hold to its credit, because a lot of movies kind of don't do this, right? Where they like break their own rules or whatever, and this doesn't seem to do that exactly. Like across the entire series, probably. Like I think I remember the first one as pretty grounded, like heightened but grounded. Like these were still real people, and here we are in pure comic book territory. But that's not a problem. If you sell me that kind of movie from the beginning, which this does, then I'm okay with it. I'm not okay with it if you tell me it's one thing, but then you deliver me another, but it's not clear that there was a good reason for it.
I think as well with the beekeeper, because I know you mentioned that as well, was that there was just like some ridiculous stuff kind of going on with it.
It was you that said it. 'Cause I think someone
Yeah,
mentioned about
it was.
yeah.
It was a whole like aspect of how he even got into the White House is one that I remember, where it was like the most basic thing. There wasn't like any like real thought behind it. He just kind of he was like kind of crawling underneath cars, and then I can't remember how he did that. I think he put a bodyguard sort of outfit on, and then just kind of found himself in the White House, and you're like, okay. It just didn't really make sense that this kind of like regular beekeeper guy would end up in that situation. And I feel like they just kind of try to push it further than it needed to be. Whereas like in this movie, there's a lot of just really good like hand-to-hand combat actions that doesn't need to be, in this like grand place, but is done well. Like for example, the scene where the entities kind of led Tom Cruise down the wrong path, and he's in this like really tight alley with the 2 people that are after him, and you're having like this like fight scene, and you can kind of see that his normal way of fighting is changed because he's in this like confined space, and he's having to like make do, and he's having to kind of like figure things out because you're in this like this small confines. And yeah, you have like stuff like on top of the train and stuff like that, where they're trying to have this fight and they're like ducking power lines and stuff like that. And that's been in previous movies before, not just Mission Impossible, but other kind of like spy movies. But overall, it's like Daniel said, it's realistic, and it's not kind of changing what it is. These are people that know how to fight, know how to do hand-to-hand combat, and they just do it to like a good standard in this movie. And no one's invincible in this. No one's just like this like Mary Sue that's like absolutely destroying everyone. Like,
yeah, they're all capable spies, right? And they do capable spy things. And like at no point did I like watching this did I think, oh, this is just stupid. And I think that is that ties back to like the practical stunts thing, where the big appeal is that at least once in the movie, Tom Cruise does something absolutely ridiculous, but he's really doing it, right? Like in this movie, he's kind of paragliding off a cliff to catch up with a train. And I don't know what movie it was. Like one of the earlier ones is where he's hanging onto the side of a plane while it takes off, and he really did that. Obviously, he was secured and everything, but he really did that, right? It's not CGI. And to me, there's the big appeal. Then I compare that to the trailer for Final Reckoning, and that looks so much better. Part of why I was harping on about the negatives for part 1 in the beginning was that I kind of had seen the trailer to Final Reckoning first, and then I watched Reckoning Part 1. It's just so different. Like the pacing, the tone, the style of it is so different. And that's because the trailer is, you just cut it down to, a minute of the highlights. And if you do that, it looks much more exciting. It looks much more fast paced. They don't show the big, exposition scenes. And then that's kind of the bulk of the actual movie. So I'm kind of wondering what that will be like in the actual movie if we're in for like 2 or 3 pretty cool sequences and then a whole bunch of talking for the rest. I'm not entirely sure. But like just the trailer itself kind of promised me like that's kind of why it got my attention in the first place, even though I haven't seen a Mission Impossible movie in at least 10 years, is that like this is kind of old school Hollywood. This is practical stunts, this is set pieces, this is action adventure. And this is something that so many movies don't deliver at the moment, right? Like even the big action blockbusters don't really do that. They either tend to be pure CGI action or they minimize the action adventure. So that's kind of where I'm sitting with this, that I kind of want this old feeling from the 90s back. And the trailer seems to offer me this, but then the actual movie doesn't seem to.
Do you feel like the spy genre is coming to an end, especially after this drops? Because obviously we saw what happened with Argyle, and I asked that question because obviously what you just like kind of jumping off of what you're saying, it feels like the whole, you know, big theatrical blockbuster feeling when it comes just to like the action and CGI is kind of like dying out because we don't get anymore. Do you feel like the whole spy genre, people are just kind of like tired, not even tired, maybe they feel like they're a bit too grown up. Especially after Final Reckoning drops, you think the spy genre is going to die down? Because I feel like that's where we get most of what you're talking about in these type of movies. And other stuff as well, like superhero movies and stuff, etc. But especially with these ones, that whole theatrical, exaggerated, out of this world, crazy stunts and stuff is mainly like the spy movies. Because there's another spy movie which you thought that was really good, Daniel, but they didn't do good in our box office that we reviewed. What was that again?
That was Fall Guy. That was fun for a few different reasons. One of them was the practical stunts and all of that. I don't know. So, like, I mean, what's coming out in the spy genre? Kind of, James Bond has been dead for a decade. That franchise has its own issues, but that tended to be like the jet-setting, high society spy action. The Kingsman movies, there was like 3 movies if you count Argyle, I think, and one of them was good. Like Argyle was not great, and Kingsman 2, it wasn't called that, but whatever it was called, I watched that and it was nowhere near as good. You know, what else is there? There's this. Like, one of the things I really enjoyed about this movie is just going to exotic places. And just, it feels like you're really there. You're really in Venice. You're really in the Alps. So just like this globetrotting action adventure where we're kind of chasing the globe, like chasing some objective across the globe. I'm really up for that. And then kind of that's why I was kind of going into this kind of with kind of an optimistic take or an optimistic attitude, because like that, I kind of want more of that from movies, and many of them are not really giving that to us. Even just beginning with just being in real places, just the sense of scale. Like, there's a whole bunch of scenes in this where like we really are in Venice and really are running across the bridges, and it kind of matters that we're in Venice, for example, for no particular reason. Like that fencing scene on the bridge in Venice kind of stood out to me. Like, this is cool. Like, this does not look like every other action movie I've seen in the last 2 years, right? This looks different. It feels different. Even simply just the physicality of being in a place that is not something that the average action movie even does these days. They never feel real. They never feel like it's an actual place. And that is kind of why I'm kind of in this ambivalent place, right? Where I want it to be good, but the first part didn't make me too optimistic. But I kind of want, I kind of like the platonic idea of like this classic action movie.
No, you're right. And I think especially like the location point that you made was definitely a highlight for me as well. It kind of reinforced the feeling of him being a spy, because I haven't seen a spy movie in such a long time. So
just to bring this back to your question, like, and the spy movie tended to be really good at this, right? Like, you go to all sorts of places and they look and feel different. And you go through 3 or 4 different places. You go to Istanbul, and you go to Venice, and you go to Egypt, and you go to Tokyo or Hong Kong, like, and it feels different. And it feels like you're going across the globe, and the story is big, and these are people who operate on a different level, and that's fun to watch, even if it's not, not realistic at all, but it's still fun to watch. And like, the spy genre has tended to deliver on that fantasy really, really well. And like, with a lack of that, with not many of those around, like, there's not much else that really is scratching the same itch.
Yeah, I feel like it also enhances an action scene, especially like the Rome car chase scene. I feel like if that happened in America, it wouldn't have been as good as Rome, because like with the whole yellow car, that's like obviously I know a lot of people from the country actually drive those type of cars as well, and it's just, that scene by the way was amazing. But
just down to the fact that in Europe's like streets tend to be very narrow and very winding, that already changes compared to an American city, which is very like on a grid and stuff like that, and you don't have like 500-year-old houses and whatever. It just changes how it feels, right? So if you go to different places, it feels different. And that matters, yeah.
What was you guys' favorite action sequence?
Again, I would say, and I think I already mentioned it, but I think I mentioned it for a reason, was just that fight scene in the alleyway. Like Daniel mentioned, is that, you can kind of feel the physicality of the fight. You can feel the sort of compactness of the sort of place that they're fighting in, and the French girl,
Isn't she just called Paris, or is that a nickname?
Paris. It might be a nickname, but just like her kind of like ferociousness in that fight when she's just like whacking the pole against the walls and stuff like that, and just like kind of relentlessly going at him. And then even like the final moment of the fight where she's kind of defeated and he's got the pole in his hand, and it's just a test of his character, and he could kill her there and then, but he just like smacks the wall just to kind of show his strength, and he's like, I could do it if I wanted to, and you made me very angry or whatever like that, and especially the situation that they're in. But he's still a good person at the end of it, and didn't need to unnecessarily kill her, basically, even though there's a bit of plot armor there. But I feel like that's just one that I enjoyed the most, especially even like how he got tricked to sort of to get there by the entity, where he feels like he's speaking to his guy on the mic, but then the entity's tricking him and he's like sending him like down different paths, etc. And then he just ends up in that situation. I just thought everything about the lead up to that was pretty cool.
Yeah, kind of like the cat and mouse game in the Abu Dhabi airport. I think that sequence is 2 or 3 times longer than it needs to be, but just the base, like the logistics of the airport, and airports are these very artificial and very scripted and very structured environments where it's very clear where you're supposed to go, and it's one of the most structured environments that most people will be in, right? And to have like this kind of cat and mouse game with the AI where where the AI is watching them and trying to trick them, or trying to outsmart them, and these agents are trying to find the agents of the AI, and the AI is scrubbing the footage in real time, and so they have to second guess it. That legitimately was good. In terms of the action, like the paraglide off the mountain, I thought was really, really good. And I kind of liked how all of these, what is it, like 6 movies in, they still made it seem like effort. Ethan Hunt kind of has doubts and he's a little bit scared, and I think he needs more than one attempt to really get going, and he tries to find another way because it's just too dangerous. I think if you're this deep into a franchise, it's very easy to make your main character just way too powerful, in the sense that nothing is an effort, nothing is dangerous. And I was kind of surprised that Ethan Hunt is not at this point in this, like at that point in the franchise, even though he does superhuman things every movie. It would be very easy for Tom Cruise to make Ethan Hunt like a superhuman, right? Who has no weaknesses and who has no, and he is meant to be like not superhuman exactly, but he's meant to be hyper competent and feared by everybody. And throughout the movie, people keep talking about how amazing he is. But then when you actually see him in action, he still is fairly grounded and fairly human. And I think that really helps with kind of the believability of this. Where if it was just a CGI ragdoll that's falling off like a cliff, nobody would care. And if the movie kept telling us how amazing Ethan Hunt is, nobody would also care, because like you're not going to impress me with an action sequence. It has to communicate something. If we're seeing the main character struggle a little bit and be a little bit intimidated, and then he succeeds, then that's much more compelling. And I was really pleasantly surprised that they remembered this, and I think that is why, like, the paragliding scene stuck out to me, because ultimately he just jumps off a mountain and then lands on a train. Like, I've seen that many times in movies, right? Like, just in terms of what's happening, it's not that impressive, but they made it impressive. Number one, because I knew it was a practical stunt, at least in part, whatever, like however they actually did it. But also, like, the movie told me that this was a big deal and sold me on the idea that the character knew it was a big deal. And I think that really helps.
And again, this is kind of, I was gonna say, this is kind of what we ask in certain movies. Not to rag on the Beekeeper one more time, but this is kind of what we were saying in movies like that, where it's like, it's not difficult to just add a little bit of humanity into the character, and a little bit of sort of, this person isn't a superhuman and isn't just gonna mow through everyone in the movie, because again, it's unrelatable and you can't sort of get behind the character, and it just doesn't feel rewarding to see them succeed and achieve if they haven't had to overcome anything at all at any point in the movie. And again, this is fairly small, and there was like other parts where he's had to doubt, and he's like playing this cat and mouse game with Grace in this movie as well, where he's just kind of he's not perfect, basically. And even when he sees like the main villain in this at first in the airport, and he kind of like recognizes the danger that they're in. And he just like tells them to abort the mission, etc. It's kind of showing that he has those doubts, and like there are things that still challenge him and he needs to overcome. And that's kind of just all we ask. And in that particular scene that Daniel's talking about, it's not something that is overplayed at all. It's something that's like fairly quick, fairly simple. It's like, oh, are you sure? And then he, like, in that moment, he quickly has to figure out, because the guy on the mic is telling him just jump off, but then he has to quickly sort of analyze the situation that he's in at the moment. He's like, I need to get away from this mountain. How do I do that? Okay, this is what I need to do. And then we're behind him. We're on board with it. And again, it just doesn't take that much to put it in there.
I kind of want to go off what you mentioned, Daniel, regarding the whole humanity in the characters and them not being what do you guys say, Nancy Sue or whatever? Was it
Mary Sue?
So Mary Sue is like a wish fulfillment character who has no flaws, who is the best at everything. Their entire personality is being awesome.
The point was Gabriel. How do you guys feel about Gabriel's character as a villain? And at times, did he feel like a Mary Sue? Because I'll be honest with you, I think his character was kind of like parallel to the entity, because at times he felt like he was omniscient and omnipotent. The way that he was just moving, the way that he'd know what's about to happen and what's going. He was very calculating. So how did you guys feel about his character?
I mean, he's being guided by an all-powerful AI, right? Who can see everything, who knows everything, right? If you're in that position, you're going to have a bunch of advantages, right? Also, there's a difference, I think, between a powerful villain and a powerful hero, because we're supposed to see the hero's struggles. And if they are too powerful and if they have not enough flaws, then it's not a compelling journey. And a villain is meant to provide that kind of obstacle and that kind of threat. And so them being powerful enhances the story, whereas a hero being too powerful diminishes the story. I think that's the difference.
Regarding his motivations, do you feel like it was clear enough? Because I didn't necessarily understand just why he wanted to know, like, what happens when you open the entity or something. I don't know. I forgot how that whole entity thing operates. But in terms of like just his motivation in general and why he was doing what he was doing, it didn't necessarily for me feel clear enough. Was it just that he just wants to be one like the most powerful man in the world?
I'm not sure it's explained in this one, right? He just serves the AI, right? Like there's a lot of detail to keep track of, and a lot of characters. I'm not sure it's really revealed in this one, right? He just serves the AI, and the AI gives him the resources and kind of the guidance to do what he does, right? And he kind of just executes the AI's plan, and I'm not sure we know why. I imagine this is something that comes in part 2, and normally I don't like justifying story flaws by saying, oh well, there's always a part 2, but kind of figuring out kind of the top henchman's motivation, that's something that belongs in part 2, right?
I agree, and I think this this entire story was just about the focus on the entity and like the race to have control over it, or the race to sort of find the keys to then have some type of control over it. I don't feel like his true motivation behind it needed to be revealed here, because again, the main threat is the entity, and the main threat is trying to keep Ethan Hunt away from sort of having the means to destroy it, because it knows the biggest threat to it is Ethan Hunt. Everyone else will keep it alive in some shape or form, whether it's trying to control it, etc., even though it probably doesn't want to be controlled. The main sort of kind of antagonist to it was Ethan Hunt, and Ethan Hunt's sort of will to destroy it. So again, we'll kind of understand a little bit more about his overall plan. And I feel like maybe it was like the AI and sort of the entity's plan to get someone from Ethan's past as well, to sort of kind of like haunt him as well, and to maybe throw him off. And maybe in its calculations, it kind of, picked up that because this happened between, this character and Ethan Hunt, that, that might sort of maybe throw him off his game, or the entity was maybe, like was mentioned in the movie, relying on Ethan Hunt to possibly kill him or something like that, so that he didn't get certain information or something along the lines. I can't remember what was said in the movie, but like Dan said, it's one for the second movie, and if they don't explain it well in that movie, then we have a problem.
And also, while what's the guy's name? While Gabriel is the antagonist, one of the antagonists, really, it's like it's not the point of the story, right? The point of the story is getting the key, and you've got all these different factions who want to get the key or want to keep somebody else from getting the key, and I think that's the part that's important. And I'm not sure the henchman's motivation is necessary for that. Maybe that becomes a bigger part in the second one, I don't know. But I think it was fine here.
Yeah. Normally when we kind of like rip on these movies, it's because the story itself isn't great. And I know we talked about the characters in the exposition dump that sort of kind of was all throughout the movie, and the characters felt wooden. But what did you think of the story itself and sort of the kind of like the main plot of the movie? Because just because we was kind of touching on it, because for me, I feel like it handled it better than most other action movies. And again, it's not, this amazing story with like amazing plot lines and stuff like that in it, but when we're talking about sort of set action movies and stuff like that, all I ask for is, does the plot make sense, and is the story serviceable enough to sort of warrant the action that's kind of going on in the movie? And for me, it delivered that. It delivered an interesting enough story that you can kind of like get behind, and it had enough sort of kind of twists and characters double bluffing and things like that in it for it to kind of be a little bit better. I wouldn't even say it's a little bit better. It was a lot more enjoyable than your typical action movies that kind of sort of typically come out. But what was you guys' impression of the story itself?
Even though I did have, like I said, I had a good experience, but I think that story felt heavily reliant on the past and nostalgia. Because I think when I was watching the story, there was moments, I think it would have been more impactful for me if I knew what was going on, especially like the relationship dynamics and why certain things felt so like a profound, deep moment. When Gabriel made Ethan not decide, but he said to him, "You're gonna have to choose between his two friends. Well, the two spies. Well, the thief and obviously his spy friend." Obviously, that was in relation to what happened in the past. Obviously, you saw flashbacks with obviously the other girl who died. So I felt like a moment like that would have been more impactful. It would have hit more for me if I knew what the hell was going on in the past, and you know what I'm saying, if I knew, just like the backstory to everything. So I think this, when it comes to the story itself, even though the key, like the whole introduction with the AI being the villain, the entity, even though that was like a new incorporation to the whole franchise, I think it was still heavily reliant on what happened in the past.
It's a bit of a weird one where it's not meant to be, I don't think, like a continuous narrative. Like this is supposed to be the start of a new story, but at the same time, we spend a whole bunch of time on Ilsa's death, for example. And I just didn't care because she does nothing in this movie that makes me care about her. But apparently, if you've seen the two movies before this, it's much better. And we can't really blame a movie series for requiring you have seen the previous movies, right? Like that's not a criticism exactly. I think a lot of time gets spent on stuff like this, and that kind of just did not. As somebody who's trying to get into the franchise, right, or is trying to get back into it without seeing 6 movies, I think there was a little bit too much reliance on stuff like this. And then the actual conflict itself, I think, kind of suffers from how slow everything is. Where the basic conflict of it is pretty simple. We live in a networked world, and so an AI taking over will destroy everything. And whatever exists after that is completely different. And so, like, who you were before that does not matter. How much money you have doesn't matter. Like, your nations don't matter. Only the AI matters, right? And that's a really cool idea. There's kind of two reasons why it didn't really grab me as much as it should have. First one is the constant slow motion exposition. It's just way too much. It's too abstract. It's too high-minded. They should have taken that and then wrote actual dialogue that expresses those ideas. And here they're kind of just exchanging like high-level concepts, and that just does not bring across the urgency at all of what's happening. And the second one is that right now it's all abstract. It hasn't happened yet. The entity is like, we see it do stuff, but we don't really see like an example of what happens when it takes over. And maybe that's kind of what the movie was missing, where it had taken over in one place and we see that place and we see it's terrible. Maybe if that had happened, then we would have had a clear idea of what is actually at stake. Because like as it stands, it's just way too abstract.
I can agree with that. I think that's a fair criticism. That last part about actually seeing the true capabilities of the AI. I think that's fair.
That follows into my next question. So, what questions are you most eager to have answered with part 2? Predictions, hopes, etc.
Is Paris dead? Because that whole scene annoyed me, because she kind of got up and had the strength to sort of lift him from the trains that were falling down, and then just casually took a seat.
Yeah, that scene was mad. When I saw that, I was like, okay, this is where it gets ridiculous.
Or pretended to die or whatever, but I was like, I remember seeing it the first time and I was like, it doesn't make sense. I watched it the second time and I was like, this is some BS, man. Like, how is she just like gone from lifting 2 people, not even just one person, because he was also holding on to her, but had the strength to lift up 2 people and haul them up off the train that was falling down, and then just went and died. So, is she dead? Is she alive? I don't know. They mentioned that she was, she still had a pulse or whatever, but it just annoyed me. Like, that happened in the movie. So probably not the biggest thing that needs answering, but it was just like something that kind of stuck with me. But a serious answer, biggest sort of kind of like thing I want answered in this is I actually don't think I've got too many questions to be honest about the story. Again, it's all kind of simple enough. I don't think I care too much about character motivations to sort of kind of want a character sort of conflict. I don't think there's like a great character conflict in this that needs resolving. You kind of just want to see maybe what Daniel said is have the AI take over for a little bit and actually have the threat of the AI be visible for a period of time so that we can then kind of see why everyone is so scared of it and why everyone wants to control it as much as they do.
At least in one place, right? Maybe they go into kind of the AI's lair or something, or it begins to take over in one place. So like the style of this movie has made it really difficult for me to get really invested in characters. Like I honestly do not care about any of these people because they don't come across as people. And that's a real detriment. And that's kind of why I was so dispassionate about this movie. Like on paper, I like a lot of the pieces, but I don't care yet. And I think this movie was supposed to make me care. Like that's kind of what the first part does, right? First part sets up the conflict, introduces the characters, raises the stakes, makes the audience care, and then in the second one you deliver on like the big payoff. And at this point, I don't care yet. And I hope that second movie changes that. This concept has so much potential that I want them to do something interesting with that. And related to that, I hope they actually fight the entity. And I hope it's not just a MacGuffin, like a box that sits somewhere and they have to get to the box or something like that, right? And like I would like them to actually go up against the entity and the entity pulls out all the stops and then the heroes still win. That's kind of what I would want the movie to do. And I'm not terribly optimistic that that's what will happen, but that would be really cool. Where normally they fight humans, right? And they kind of tend to exploit kind of the shortcomings in humans, right? But an AI doesn't make mistakes and an AI doesn't get tired. And how do these super spies fight somebody who has those qualities? And that has a lot of potential. And I just wonder if that's what they're going to do or if it's going to be a little bit more run of the mill. You know, I'm curious to see what they do with it.
After watching this movie, would it be something that you'd recommend to someone that wants to get into the whole spy genre, or not even spy genre, just the Mission Impossible franchise?
It certainly made me want to watch the others because there's like 4 movies that I have not seen and that are apparently better than this. Like I've read some opinions and they tended to be, yeah, this is not great, like on a character, on a plot level. And if Mission Impossible fans are saying this, then that kind of makes me optimistic or hopeful about what the others are like. And I'm definitely going to check out at least a few of them that I haven't seen yet. And I hope that works out.
I actually put on the very first movie. I haven't finished it yet, but I put on the very first movie after watching this one, just to kind of see where it all started. Again, just because I was enjoying sort of kind of what I'd seen and where the franchise had come to, and knowing that the next one is the final reckoning, and I don't know whether it's the last in the franchise. It just kind of made me a little bit nostalgic to see where it had come from and how far it's come since then. And for sure, I think of all the kind of action spy thriller sort of movie franchises, I definitely feel like this is one of the best ones. Even if this wasn't the best installment in the franchise, there's definitely plenty of sort of good movies within the franchise. And again, I know completely, but I do remember having a very, very, very good time with Ghost Protocol and Fallout compared to this movie, even though this one was enjoyable as well. So I would highly recommend it.
Does anyone else have anything to mention before we get to last thoughts?
That's kind of where my last thoughts.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
We can wrap
I
it up.
might as well just end there. All right, guys. Thank you very much for tuning into today's discussion. Apologies, it didn't turn into a debate, but hey, next time.
If you made it this far in the video, thank you very much for rocking with us. Of course, if you liked everything that you heard today, tell a friend. And if you hated everything we discussed and you thought we were just chatting a bunch of nonsense, tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
You heard it here first, guys. We'll catch you next week. Au revoir.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.